Good evening. Can you all hear me in the back? Good? Yeah, great. Hi. My name is Shanti Rubenstone, and I am, among other things, one of the ministers at a place called Ananda, which happens to be the group that is sponsoring the Sharing Nature events for the weekend. And I tell you now just because it will matter in a moment in my introduction that I also happen to be a physician who went to medical school and trained locally at Stanford University, and am still practicing medicine. So I've been in and around the science world a bit, and that matters tonight. I've been asked to introduce a fair number of people in my life, and every once in a while it happens that it feels like such a great honor to do that, that one feels inside that it would be hard to do justice to the person being introduced, and I feel that tonight. I also feel that when that happens, it's a struggle to do it in a way that doesn't sound like pure hyperbole, because it might. But I want to say to all of you at the outset, it is not. That everything I tell you about our speaker, Joseph Cornell, is true, and there's much more that I won't be able to share with you tonight. Joseph is a world-renowned writer and educator. He had his awakening, I think, as a little boy, a very young boy, really, when he realized that the way to touch people's heart, to have them awaken, to have them know truth, to really reach their highest potential was through nature. And that came to him long before the 1970s when he started writing. He's now written 10 books, and I just asked Sundara, who you'll hear from soon, I said, you know, I was looking over these notes that I wrote. I said to Sundara, is this a typo or is this real? He said, no, it's real. That the Sharing Nature series, which was the beginning of the books that he published, and I want to quote this to you. It says his first book, Sharing Nature with Children, was selected by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as one of the 15 most influential books published since 1890. I thought maybe they meant 1990. But no, they meant 1890. Well, it's wonderful to know you're all listening. Yeah, isn't that remarkable? His work has had a truly revolutionary impact around the world. When he first started writing about sharing nature, first with children, then with adults, from a place of experience, not from observation, not from distance, but a place that would take people out, have them experience nature at a much more, at a feeling level, at a heart and soul level, at that place where one can be truly touched and transformed. And he figured out how to do that. I thought today, maybe I'll just look at some of his awards and I'll read them to you. And again, remember what I said about hyperbole. I reduced the font to size 10, which was about as low as I could go, and it was still 2.5 pages. So I'm not going to read them all, but why is this all so important, really? It's important because what we're about to hear as we listen, and tonight he'll speak about his most recent book, Deep Nature Play, which is also, by the way, what the workshop, the experiential workshop in Huddard Park, will be based on a lot of that book That's tomorrow from 10 to 2. But when you write books that are so profoundly impacting people, I asked him yesterday, I said, Joseph, are people actually practicing around the world this forest therapy, which is what this is called? He said, 2.5 to 3 million people right now in Japan. And then he started listing countries in Asia, in Western Europe, in Africa, literally all over the world. He was recently invited to write 2 chapters I didn't bring this up here with me, but in a handbook that's being published later this year, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, on forest therapy. There are people from 14 countries contributing. He was one of 2 people around the world invited to write a chapter on the practices for forest therapy. 14 countries are represented in the authorship. When work touches people around the world like this, we know that there's truth in it. We know that it's something beyond mind, beyond intellect. There's a place that all of these millions of people can't argue because he is coming from that place of truth and sharing in a way where people just say, I want to be around this. I want to practice what he's practicing. I think for now that's all I'll say about him. That's a lot, and you hear the import of what's going to go on tonight. Again, a man who's literally had this impact around the world, and in a revolutionary way, and we have the honor of being with him this evening. Before we hear from Joseph, I'd like to introduce Greg Traymore, who is now the International Director of Sharing Nature, which is the organization that's developed to be able to share these practices everywhere. Greg trains the people who are going to go out and do the work. He's worked with Joseph for 10 years now, so I'm sure he's going to give us an insider's view. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to say, forgive me. When I first read this book, I was spending a week in silence, and I picked up this book and I read it. It had not yet been published. And what I wanted to share with people, again, it's on sale here tonight. I picked the book up thinking I'd read a little bit each day. This is the truth. I never put the book down. I told you I'm a physician. I've been a scientist all of my life. This book is filled with miracle after miracle. It's filled with heart and soul-touching information, and it is packed full of the science that supports all of these practices now, because that's where we've come. Science is finally catching up, whether it's meditation, whether it's this forest therapy. And I realized when I read that book, because people think of sharing these books with parents, with educators, with everybody who's working with children, and I thought to myself, if this book could be taken to Stanford Medical School and every medical school around the country, if it could be taken into law offices, if it could be taken into our congressional houses, people would not be able to be arguing with each other anymore. That is the power of his books to transform lives. You cannot play with each other at this level. You can't experience heart to heart and not realize your connectedness, your oneness with all. The impact of this work cannot be overstated, and I, for one, am praying that it makes it out of the educational realm and into, obviously it is already with this handbook that I'm telling you about, but much more into all of these places that so deeply need this healing that he brings. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shanti. Yes, a little higher. Okay. Thank you for those very kind words of Joseph. I came to Joseph and Sharing Nature about 10 years ago. Like many of you, I found Sharing Nature through the book Sharing Nature with Children. And once I started using that book, it completely changed my life. For the first time, the activities, I could harness the children's energy in such a way that they were completely immersed in nature, and they just said, I want more, I want more. But that book, Sharing Nature with Children, which was published in 1979, next year will be our 40th anniversary of Sharing Nature being spread around the world. And it's spread around the world not from a large organization with unlimited funding and a huge amount of people. It's spread through the world, people to people. Individuals like yourselves who had a deep experience of nature through one of the Sharing Nature activities. And isn't that the great, how everything spreads? From one person having a wonderful experience. And that's really the essence of Sharing Nature in its worldwide spread. It's used in the elementary science school curriculum throughout Japan. It's used by the Swedish Farmers Association. It's used at the Punahou School in Hawaii, where Barack Obama went. Recently, we're in China last year, and we did a 5-city tour of China, and Joseph gave a lecture to 600 people. And it was so touching, as China hasn't always been maybe the greatest in environmental concerns and protection, but now they're really going forward with a lot of energy. But through my time and through all of there's been a lot of people who have just shared their experiences of how Sharing Nature has touched them. When I was in college, a friend of mine, when Joseph came to speak, she said very quietly, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my university degree, I looked back at my life and it was filled with nothing but Sharing Nature experiences. And now she is in the sustainable agriculture field. And recently we're in Slovenia, and there was a Slovenian forester, who came to one of our programs, and he said that he had been using the Sharing Nature activities for 16 years. And at the end of the workshop, he said, with just this gleeful, childlike look on his face, he said, I was feeling so burnt out. Now I feel like my childhood dreams have come true. He just never experienced the activities like that. And that's the power of Sharing Nature, is giving people not just information, but heartfelt experiences that stay with them for so long. In Germany, at one of our workshops, there's these 2 boys there who I knew weren't German. They're in their 20s. And at the end of the workshop, they said that they're from Syria. They're refugees. And they wanted to learn the Sharing Nature activities so that when the Syrian children would come and integrate with the German children, through the Sharing Nature activities, it would help them integrate in a more fun and playful way. And so many of these stories we hear from people around the world, that it's so much more, like, as Shanti was saying, than mere nature education. But the secret of Sharing Nature is not just outer nature, but it's human nature. And that's what Joseph so creatively and with such genius was able to tune in. If you find a way of uplifting people's consciousness, touching people's hearts, it's not a matter of climate change, whether one believes in it or not. Who can deny the beauty of a sunset? Who can deny the beauty of the thrill of songbirds after a rain in the morning? Those are universal aspects of human nature. And the worldwide spread is because touching those universal principles. When Joseph was giving that talk last year in China, before he spoke, there was they did a presentation of different environmental leaders from around the world. And there was, I didn't know many of them from other countries, but the United States was focused. And there was Henry David Thoreau, there was John Muir, there was Rachel Carson, there was Jane Goodall, and there was Joseph Cornell. Joseph Cornell is part of a great lineage of light bearers, those who have come to bring in a new expression of how we can relate to nature. And it's timeless, it's universal, and no doubt it'll, as Shanti was saying, it'll spread beyond just the nature education field. because everybody wants to feel that deeper connection with nature. And so now, may we all give a warm welcome to a man who Backpacker Magazine named as one of the most highly regarded nature educators in the world, Joseph Cornell.
I want to thank you all for coming this evening. I would like to share a lot of wonderful activities, but a whole philosophy, a way of life. I recently heard from a friend who is teaching the sharing nature activities with a group of priests, and they were in a program for chemical and behavioral addiction. And after playing the shared nature games, they said, I started to use my senses. I felt a sense of wonder. I became a little boy again. And they just were able to just drop away everything that really wasn't themselves. My whole desire was to use nature to help people to get in touch with their own higher nature, because nature, doesn't have an ego, and it's safe, and it just pulls out the best in ourselves. When I first started teaching, I met a couple teachers actually from the American Southwest. This was the early in the 70s, and they both individually at different times, they told me about their experience when they asked children in their classroom to draw a picture of themselves. And so on a large piece of paper, the American children, they drew their legs, their trunk of their body, their arms, and their head, and they covered the whole piece of paper with a picture of themselves as they were asked to do. Well, both of the teachers happened to have had Navajo children in their class, and they drew themselves differently, because on the large piece of paper, they drew themselves just this big, then the dry desert wash, the canyon walls, and the clouds in the sky, because they felt the environment all around them was just as much a part of who they were as their own arms and legs. And isn't this why we want to share about nature with other people? We're hoping that they'll feel a profound connection and feel really a part of the world around them. And isn't this the greatest lesson that nature has to teach and to share with us? But how do you do that? When I first broke into the field, they had a method of education called the walk, stop, and talk method. And there was the leader, the guide, and they were walking along, and everybody would be behind, and in some cases they'd have a bullhorn, and they'd walk along like this, and then they'd see something, everybody would stop, and they'd talk about it, and then they'd walk along. I went on one walk. I was in the Midwest in Ohio as a young naturalist, went on a tree walk, and the closest I got to a tree was 40 feet. And the man was a wonderful naturalist. I really liked him. He actually was such a vibrant, radiant man. But I was starting to get a little bored because I was so far away from the trees. And I thought, well, maybe I'm not sincere in wanting to be a naturalist. But I wanted to engage people. And I found through nature activities that people would become fully engaged and they would become alive. And because of that, all of nature would become alive. And then I discovered through deep nature play that children would be really absorbed in the experience, and they'd be so immersed that they would lose a consciousness of self, and they would get into a sense of timelessness in the present moment. One great Taoist, he was sitting by the river, and he said, the sound of water is what I think. And it was only the thought of water. He was just immersed in the river that was flowing by him. And how often are we really in touch. We psychologists say that the average person in a minute, I think it is, has 300 self-talk thoughts going on. They can happen real quicker in the brain than out loud. And there's an amusing study that Microsoft, everybody knows about Microsoft. In the year 2000, they studied the attention span of Canadians and goldfish. And they found that in the year 2000, that the Canadians had an attention span of 12 seconds. And then they studied the goldfish. I won't tell you what their attention span was until a little bit later. And then 13 years later, they studied the Canadians again. And they found that their attention span declined 33%. It was now only 8 seconds. And so 33% decline. Well, the goldfish in the year 2000, they had an attention span of 9 seconds. And somehow they didn't lose their attention span 13 years later. So if you put the Canadians and the goldfish head to head, the Canadians would have won 9-8. So if you're ever talking to a Canadian, make sure that you have their attention. I joke about Canadians, but they have a more simple life than probably we do in the lower 48. So anyway, but we all know the demands of modern living. And one of the secrets, of course, is helping people to get into the present moment. And that's where the absorbing nature experiences come. Because if we our minds are going every which way, and we're in the past or in the future, we aren't here and now. And that's the only way that you can really appreciate and be with nature. There's an interspecies animal communicator from South Africa. And she's able to talk to different species of animals. And they hooked her up to a bioresonance machine that could measure her the wavelengths of her brain. And when she was communicating with an animal, it was in the right side of the brain. And it was just a pure transmission of receiving the thoughts and images and the pictures of the animal. Animals often, they think in pictures. And then when she started to write down what she had learned and what the animal had told her and started to analyze it, it shifted to the left side of the brain. And she said the trick to understanding and communicating with another animal is setting aside your intellect and your previous knowledge. And there's a time to zero down and to work with something so that you can clarify it and understand it and communicate it. But in the beginning, we want to have the experience. That's why early on, Sharing Nature had two extremely important tenets. One is to experience first, then talk. And then a sense of joy should permeate the experience. A sense of joy permeating the experience means that you're having a living contact with nature. You're not talking about nature, but you're immersed in the experience itself. And they've been studying about the both sides of the brain, and the right side sees things in a greater context, and then the left side analyzes. The left side receives the information from the right side of the brain and the full context. And the ideal is that you analyze it, then you give it back to the right side of the brain. Much like a musician who learns has a piece of music, and then they learn parts of the music, and they play the different notes, and then they put it back all together in the performance again. And then you have the beauty, and you don't have something isolated. Interesting thing about Einstein, there's so many things to learn about his life. He used his intuition to, as we know, to discover things. In 1905, he wrote 5 revolutionary scientific papers, and really just changed how we think of science, fundamentally changed it. And there was a scientist today, a physicist, who said that, you know, if Einstein would have published his papers today without any references or citations, his paper would be thrown away in the trash. But because he was using his intuition, it was fresh, and nobody had ever considered it. And this is what's so important with the experience of nature. It's that if we go in and we are using facts and information or what we already know, it doesn't have any sense of aliveness. But when it's just pure experience, then that's when it's very overwhelming, and it teaches, really touches us very profoundly. You know, it's working with feelings. We, in Western cultures particularly, science has said, you know, forget about feelings, you know, just use reason. But there's 2 different kinds of feeling. One feeling is disturbed feeling, that's emotions, and that's where you have a bias. And then there's the calm feeling, and calm feeling is intuition, and it's more of an inner feeling when you have a real inner sense of something. And when you sort of interiorize your awareness, and that's when you really get at the heart of something. I did, as part of the Deep Nature Play book, I read about a lot of people who are very accomplished in the arts and science, all these different realms, and they said that the secret to their way of working, many had won Nobel Prizes, was to get in the interior of the subject of what they're studying, and to be able to then discover its effable quality. Effable means being able to sense something that can't really be described with words. So you really get at the inner essence of something. As a famous Chinese painter said that you first have to feel the bamboo living inside of you before you paint the bamboo. And so this is what the activities help us to do. Carl Jung, when he was traveling in the American Southwest, I think it was a Pueblo Indian chief called Chief Mountain Lake. And he became friends with him, and he felt like he could have an honest conversation asking some things. And he said, well, what do you think about white people? Knowing that they'd had some challenges, the tribe. And he said, well, we don't understand them. They're always so busy and restless, and they're always looking for something. We think they're a little crazy. And he said, and they say that they think with their minds. And well, Carl Jung goes, well, of course, that's how you think. Well, where do you think? And the chief said, well, we think here, in the heart. And a heart that is calm is able to really listen and feel, and to be able to really know what something is. Van Humboldt, he's a very famous naturalist. Muir wanted to be another Alexander van Humboldt. And he said that the secret to knowing nature can only be through feeling. And it's through that kind of calm feeling. Muir, up in the high Sierras, he wrote that here is calm so deep, the grasses cease waving. And wonderful how nature fits into us and part and parcel. The sun shines not on us, but in us. The river flows not past, but through us, and gliding and singing in our bodies, and just really feeling that. And of course, that's only through feeling. It's not that we don't use our minds, but that tenet of sharing nature, of experience first and then talk, come from a deep place of experience. And that will all put it together in a very magical place. So the different activities, because I wanted to work with everyone, I guess as a young man, I remember in the shower, 16, saying, I'm going to write a book. I didn't know what the topic was going to be, but it's going to go all around the world. I don't know the arrogance of that statement, but I just sort of had this sense, but I wanted everybody to really be touched and really come alive. I just found that you can't use philosophy because then it's a matter of belief, and not everybody's maybe on the same wavelength. But if it can be through experience, and then people can have their own experience, and then they open up, and that's a perfect way of working with people. And one of the early activities is one that I'd like to demonstrate now to give you a feeling for these activities. So would you like to come up, okay, please, and stand right here? This activity has become very popular. It's very simple. And you do want to stand a little bit over in the corner right there. Okay, thank you, Viras. And turn just a little bit, yeah. He hasn't done this before. So in this activity, what you do is you blindfold a person. It could be a little child. And when we play this game in Japan, they tell the children that there's a tree out in the forest that even before you were born has been waiting to meet you. And so what you do is that they have their blindfold on, and then they go and find their tree, that they're led to a tree. Is our tree a tree now?
Yes.
Okay. So you take the person to the tree, they feel its unique properties, they come back, and then they try to find that tree again with their eyes open. So. They feel the leaves, feel the texture of the bark, see if there's any moss growing on the tree. Then they see how big around the tree is. Then they go back, led back, and they take the blindfold off, and they look for their tree. Thank you. We've had children come 9 months later into a forest they're unfamiliar with, and were able to go out and point out their tree. And one child, the trees were similar, and she was, in her mind, she was going like this because she remembered the body memory of the tree was just so much. And then she went and, no, that wasn't it. And then she found her tree again. And we just don't remember things through our brain, but throughout our whole body. And I had a very interesting experience at the end of a workshop in Germany. It was for foresters. And, when we just learned information about things, we have more materialistic view of life. And this forester, Johann, he just said, before the workshop, I just used trees as a commodity like I was trained in university. And that's just how I saw the forest. But afterwards, I saw that the grasses are my friends, the trees are my friends, and everything in the forest is my friend. And he did, as part of the workshop, did an activity called meet a tree, interview a tree, where you talk to an old tree and you ask questions like, what events have you seen in your life, and who comes to visit you, what would you like to tell me? They built a tree with all the foresters, some were the heartwood and the core of the tree, the roots and the xylem, bringing the water up, and then they went through the 4 seasons of the year as a tree, and experienced the sense of sheltering all the life around them, and warming the winter air and cooling the summer air, and just a sense of nurturing life. And various other activities, and so he got to learned about trees in all these different ways, in all different parts of himself. So his understanding was much more rich, and so his appreciation was much more profound than if he would have just learned about it in just a few different ways. And so this just really transformed his way of seeing the forest. And he said it's going to make a big difference the way I work with the forest, because now the forest had come alive for him and was very nuanced, where before it was dead. We, unfortunately, in Western society, we've come for, with the sense of, well, humans are alive, everything else is dead. Maybe our cats and dogs are alive. But the idea that all of life is alive. There's one child psychologist said that the words, "let's pretend," are really revolutionary, because it helps us to suspend rationality and really open up. There's an activity that we use called Interview with Nature, and you are asking questions like with that tree, what events have you seen? And I was doing it in England, where they're a little more rational and maybe straight-laced than some other parts of the world. And there was one Royal Society for Protection of Birds warden that was there, and he was kind of looking at me kind of askance like this as I was describing the activity. And a previous activity, the fellow that wrote about it said, I was looking around for the guys in white coats. That was when you go through the seasons of the year as the tree. And but the warden, he went out there and he interviewed a warbler. And he came back and he was just telling everybody about his interview with a warbler. And he just was able to just kind of let go. And who knows whether he was accurate in what the warbler reported to him or not, but it just helps us to open up in terms of possibilities, and we start to just break down that this thing is alive too, just like I am, and then you can share a sense of commonality. And so I created a lot of activities, and I'm going to go through different ones this evening just to give you a sense of them. But there's a way of working with people so that you can create a sense of momentum and help people to have more intuitive, heart-opening experiences. And a lot of education focuses more on content, what people will remember afterwards. Of course, things are changing now. But flow learning is more about having that deep, profound, intuitive experience. It brings in, like the activity Build a Tree, where you're learning about parts of a tree and how a tree functions. So it brings in all of that, but it's in context of a much greater whole, so that you not only see the trees, but you see the whole forest. Well, flow learning has enabled me to work with the group of students and adults, any group, with a sense of energy and helping to uplift their consciousness. And the first stage is called Awaken Enthusiasm. And this activity, or this stage, you're trying to generate a lot of energy. In the beginning, people could be sort of passive, or if you're driving a car, if you're just stationary and you try to turn the wheels to change directions, it's going to be hard with the steering wheel to turn those tires, isn't it? But if you get going about 2-3 miles an hour, you can just with one finger turn the steering wheel, and then you can guide the car very easily. So try to get people in motion in the direction you want to take them. People feel alive when they're in motion, and it creates a lot of enthusiasm, and they just become awake. One of the beautiful qualities of play is that it's inner-directed, and that means that people, their it's more authentic, because actually children, when they decide to play, they're making up their own rules. And they're committed to those rules. Like this child psychologist said, you know, my son, he was playing Superman, and he did it for days on end. And at one point he fell and skinned his leg, and he got up and he started to, you know, maybe cry about it, and then he goes, Superman can't cry. And they just took off again. And their play is more intentional. And there's actually a Russian psychologist was studying 2 Russian sisters. One was 7 years old, and another was 5 years old. And they were like any other sisters. Sometimes they played with each other, sometimes they ignored each other, and sometimes they fought with each other. And and it was pretty unconscious that, you know, that's sort of what they knew and did. But one day they decided to do something. If you could come up, Greg, and if you could be on that side. I'm the older one, although she's taller. Well, one day they decided to play at being sisters. And so they started to dress alike, talk alike, and they would walk arm in arm. And they thought of what would be the most idealistic behavior or idealized behavior that sisters would have. And so the highest level of sisterhood they reenacted. And they got along really well. And it wasn't the fact that they were biological sisters that made the difference. The difference was that they were playing at being sisters, and they were doing it more intentional. And so they took it much further rather than just doing it unconsciously. Yeah, thank you very much. And so, and that's like with the guided tree imagery exercise, where you go through the seasons of the year as a tree. You're having a conscious relationship with everything else that lives in the forest. And so you are in play, when people are very intentional, they get the most out of the experience. And they're bringing more of themselves to the experience. And whenever we bring more of ourselves to something, we get, of course, we get so much more out of it. And so really, deep play can really help people to be at their best with themselves and with each other. And there's, if you're really into the play, you aren't in your ego. You're just in the experience. This Hall of Fame golfer, he talked about keeping score for his 10-year-old son's basketball team. And they were playing until halftime. And they came running in, and because it's very important to the parents and the coach what the score was, they dutifully said, "What's the score? What's the score?" And so he called out, "Well, it's 15 baskets to 2. And the students thought, or the children thought for a second, and they goes, "Who's ahead? Who's ahead?" They were just playing and just totally absorbed in the experience. And you know, this, you know, that we can remove a lot of grief out of our lives if we're just doing what we're doing wholeheartedly and not self-censoring ourselves. Adults, unfortunately, we can kind of do that as we get older. And that's why play is so important for us as we get older, because then we can drop, you know, if there's no sense of I and no ego, there can be no stress. But if you can just get into the experience of it, that's why we like extreme sports or other kinds of play, because we feel a sense of inner freedom and a sense of wholeness. And you know, what is the difference between deep play and regular play? Well, it's the degree of absorption one has with the focus of play. And when that play is in nature, then it's just a seamless transition to that sense of absorption of nature, and you actually really feel yourself in nature as part of something, and there's not that sense of separateness between that. And so the first stage, getting back to flow learning, is that it's to just generate a lot of enthusiasm, create a fond association for learning about nature. And then the second stage helps us to take it deeper. And how it does is that it helps people to pay attention and be more observant and be more aware. And it challenges adults, the children, to use one of their senses through a fun activity where people are paying really close attention. I'll give a good example of this. Actually, I'll give one now. There's an activity called the camouflage trail. And it's a very simple one. We're going to be learning a lot that you can use with adults, older audiences, but this is a good example with children. You have a trail, and then you place objects along the trail no farther than 3 feet, and you may have some things that are camouflaged, like a rusted lid. You may have a big lizard right here. But to fool them so that they think that everything is going to be big and easy to see, you might have something bright in the beginning. And then you could have a mirror, and you can put it so tilt it so that just the ground shows on the mirror, and that's harder to see. And then what the children do is they walk along and they try to see the total number of objects. And as they're walking along, they're walking like this. I know one teacher forgot to mark the end of the trail, and the children, they kept walking for 100 yards past the end of the trail, still looking like this. And one child saw at the end of the trail, they saw a lizard blink 13 feet away. And so it just helps the children to really focus. Well, adults are the same. And so these activities will just help people just to be more observant and more attentive and more mindful. So that's the second stage. The third stage is offer direct experience. And this is where the deep nature play comes into being, where people are more immersed and absorbed in the experience. And the Meet a Tree game is an example of this. We're going to be demonstrating 3 activities of this stage, because this is particularly of what's of interest to adults. And where people just get lost in the experience, and there's not a separation of you and the experience. And then the last stage is share inspiration. And this helps people they've had the experience, and research has shown it's not enough just to have the experience, but on reflecting on that experience, we gain more clarity on the value of that experience, we stay with the experience longer, and we communicate it. You know, Einstein, he had this experience of just the harmony of the universe that it wasn't just a one-time thing with him. And he said that if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't have worked for 30 years to develop a mathematical equation that proved that experience. And it's because he had that inner sense. And it's that feeling that's always the motivator in every endeavor. And if we can help people to feel strongly enough and have that kind of revelation, we really are starting them on their way for a wonderful adventure and a wonderful contribution for the rest of society, because they are really in touch with something that's alive and living. And you know, people who just come from the mind, they just rearrange things around. I had a friend who we would travel. He was actually my translator in Europe, and he wrote his first book, and he had 300 citations in the book, and at the end of his book, he proved that going out in nature is a pleasurable experience. You know, how many people here could have said that that was probably true without quoting 300 citations? But, you know, it's just sort of common sense. But to make a real contribution or a real change in people's lives, and to have things really touch them deeply, it has to be on that level of profound inner experience. And then people's lives are really changed, and people are really motivated. And so that's why it's so important. Sometimes people want to clinch the deal and say, you know, get people to agree with this or that. But, you know, if you help people to be more sensitive people, more deeply aware people, they're going to make sensitive decisions, aren't they? You know, the Buddha said that people of rigid opinions go around the world annoying people, you know, wanting everybody to believe like they do. And it's, I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to do, and people need to be informed, and we have a lot of things that are facing humanity, and the whole earth is facing right now. But you know, there's a really interesting thing. People that are really into sustainability, some of them are saying, even if we did everything right now, there's not enough time to turn the ship. We need to, and they're talking about the word regeneration, introducing a whole new paradigm, a whole new consciousness, a way of looking at things. And so when you can really help people to have that transformative experience, they see life more on the level of unity. I was really struck by when John Muir, we all know about John Muir, or most of us, we have probably maybe some international students, but John Muir is known throughout the world. When they wanted to save a national park, what did they do? They sent John Muir to be in the park and write about his love of the park, and he would write so joyfully that it would remind people on that level of their own love for nature. And then it was easier, I won't say it was easy, but it was easier to set aside these parks. And they said that all other torches of the conservation movement were lit by John Muir's torch. And it's because he came from that profound sense of joy and connection with nature, and it just reminded other people. Well, I want to I want to show a video of an activity of the focus attention stage. It's called the sound map, and it's all ages. It's just a couple minutes, and then I'm going to demonstrate some more activities that are from the direct experience stage, particularly people who are interested in more deep, kind of reflective experience of nature. You particularly like these activities as well. So could we show this sound map, please? It's a listening activity, and how it's done is you have a piece of paper, and people go out and they close their eyes. They could put their hands by their ears, and then they listen for what they hear, and then they make a mark to represent that sound and in the direction where they heard it. And it's just a way of helping people just to be attentively aware for 6, 7, 8 minutes. Okay, do you want to go ahead?
Sitting quietly, listening to the soothing voices of nearby trees, birds, and rustling grasses calms us and deepens our appreciation for the life around us. Sound map is an excellent activity for instilling greater awareness of one's surroundings. To play, Give each person a piece of paper with an X marked in the center. Tell the participants that the paper is a sound map and that the X represents where each player is sitting. When a player hears a sound, he makes the mark on the paper to represent the sound. The location of the mark should indicate the direction and distance of the sound from the player's seat. Tell players not to draw a detailed picture for each sound, but to make just a simple mark. For example, a few wavy lines could represent a gust of wind, or a musical note could indicate a bird song. Making simple marks keeps the focus on listening rather than on drawing. Encourage the players to close their eyes while listening for sounds. To help them increase their hearing ability, ask them to make fox ears by cupping their hands behind their ears. To hear a variety of natural sounds, choose an area that encompasses several habitats such as a meadow, stream, and forest. After about 4 to 10 minutes, depending on your child's age and interest level, you can share your sound map with a friend.
A hummingbird?
You might ask them the following questions. What sounds were the most familiar to you? What sound had you never heard before? What sound did you like best? Now that you've watched your first Sharing Nature activity, go outside and try it with your child. The complete instructions for this activity, as well as all others, can be downloaded in each of the course sections. Have fun.
I was talking to one environmental educator, and she said what she likes about the Sharing Nature activities is the children are learning and they don't even know it. It doesn't feel like school because it's so enjoyable, the experience. And I worked to try to really have a variety of activities that would bring everybody along, and children could relate to them, adults and enjoy them too. There's an activity that everyone has enjoyed from 4 years to 104 years old, and it's called the camera game. But first I'd like to tell you a story about a book. The author talks about there was a brain symposium at Naropa University in Colorado, and there was a young Tibetan monk there. And they were talking about the brain, and the monk was talking about how he could look and not have his view be pre-filtered. Often as we get older, we look at something and we associate it from something from the past. We don't see it clearly again because we're relating to something that we've already seen. But he said, he looked across the room and he saw an imaginary flower, and he said, "Flower, first time." And then the discussion among the scientists, people were talking, and then a little bit later the young monk said, "Flower, first time." And he just didn't look at it preconceptually, he just saw it, and he was just open enough to see it. Well, that would be really nice to live in that state of consciousness. And sometimes on a brisk autumn day or another day, we can have a feeling of that. And there's a feeling of a great sense of exhilaration, isn't there, when there's that freshness where we're really seeing life. But it doesn't happen all the time. But there's in this game, the camera game, it gives people an experience of this clear seeing. And how it's done is with two people. Could you come up, please? Okay, thank you. Ananda, if you could stand. And Ananda's going to be the camera, and I'll be the photographer. And when I tap her shoulder twice, she's going to open the lens of her eye, and she'll see what I'll be pointing the camera, and she'll see it, and then I'll tap again, and that's for her to close her eyes. And I'll only keep the exposure for about 3 seconds. And do you know why? Because if you go longer than 3 seconds, the human camera starts to get subconscious thoughts, and it takes them out of the present moment and out of the freshness of the scene. So if you just do it for 3 seconds, people look, they behold, and then they close their eyes again and they retain the memory of the picture. We've actually had people remember their picture for 8 years afterwards from this simple exercise. So we'll let's see. We'll look for someone who's really smiling and looks really radiant today. Let's see. We'll over here. Okay. So you'll probably remember that person for 8 years in your mind's eye. So there's a couple people smiling over here. Let's Okay. You can also, with your camera, take panning shots. Thanks a lot. And it's really fun to see little 4-year-olds taking their grandparents, and of course you tell the grandparents that they can peek because the 4-year-olds aren't very good leaders, but they're enthusiastic leaders. But people have this profound experience from it, and they have a moment of more clear seeing, and they kind of go, well, where did that come from? Or how can I get in touch with that myself? And it subtly opens the door for people to just want more of that kind of awareness. And so it's if you aren't going to come to the program tomorrow, can't make it, I encourage you to try this, because it's a really easy activity to do. There's another activity called Nature and Me, and this is an activity that just helps you to just stay in the present moment. And Ananda, my wife, she was just up here. We did this for the first time in Bidwell Park in Chico some years ago. And we'd had a very, very full weekend in Missouri. And we were coming back, and I just wanted to just really be with the river. It's a real beautiful river, the Bidwell Creek. And it was real lush with the plants growing along it. And so I thought of the activity of using the fingers on the leg, and every time you notice something, press the tip of starting with the left hand, the little finger. You notice something like maybe it's a bush on the edge of the river that's being, waving in the current. You would just put the fingertip down, maybe dragonflies, or damselflies, and flying along the river. You would push maybe a California buckeye. You would put the tip of your finger around, and so you do 5, and then you do 5 more, and then you could do 20. And by putting, when you see something, you aren't counting, because you don't want to get in your head and your mind, but you're just touching it, and it's just a subtle reminder that's why it's called Nature and Me, that's part of you. Because if we really are looking at something and we aren't distracted, it really does become part of us, because we take it all in. So this is a way of just staying present as you're looking at a scene. What's interesting is that we had done this, we tried it for the first time, and because we were paying attention, we saw just racing through the water this brownish blur, and we called river otters. And they just were swimming through, and 40 different people walked by where we were, and they didn't see the river otters, but they just played there for about 6-7 minutes just right in front of us. And it's only because we were paying attention. So what I would like to do is that we have a beautiful stream somewhere in, I think it might be New England area. I forgot now, but on a video, and it's just very alive. It's a stream with beech trees and falling leaves, and I don't have you outside for us to experience it, but you'll be able to experience it here with the video. And what I want you to do is put your hands on your thigh, and then every time you notice something, it could be a leaf falling from the sky, it could be the swirl of water, or just the shape of a rock, or just the dimension looking through the forest on the hillside, whatever it is, just touch your leg with the tip of your finger and just note it. You aren't counting. And then as you go through your left hand, then go to your right hand, and then do again your left hand and right hand, and you can do 20, or if you can do 30 if you want. And it'll just be for about 3 or 4 minutes, this video. But it'll give you an experience of the activity. And just remember that word of the Taoists, the sound of the water is what I think. Just let your experience be what's before you, and let everything else go. And touching the finger on your leg is like a mantra. It keeps bringing you back to just the present moment in just a simple way. Okay? You can also use this exercise by just looking at one thing and just look at it in greater and greater detail. There's another exercise that is very profound. It's called I Am the Mountain. And it's a way to just really feel inside of you the life of something else. Somebody that said that if you really want to understand something, relate from your center to its center. And you're relating from the deeper part of yourself, the deeper part of it. And you can relate to it on a level of commonality, because if you relate on the surface, you have differences. But if you relate things from the inside, that's when you have a sense of communion. And it's a way of internalizing your experience. When feeling is withdrawn, it's reason looks outside. And because it's always looking outside of oneself, it sees diversity. And it's nice to understand the individual properties of things. You have endangered species, and you understand its particular needs and of its habitat. And so, it's part of a healthy, balanced way of life, is to be able to use your reason and to focus and see what's unique about something. But if we lose that sense of wholeness, we lose that sense of harmony and that sense of really seeing everything as sacred. And so in this activity, what you're doing is you're helping people to feel that living reality in themselves. And this activity, well, actually, my book, The Sky and Earth Touch Me, was really inspired by a naturalist in England named Richard Jefferies. And he talked about feeling things inside oneself. And I'd like to I haven't quite memorized all his words yet, so I have this little sheet of paper. But I'd like to just have you hear some of his words, because they're so thrilling in terms of having that communion with nature. He said that I'm absorbed in the glory of the day. On this great earth, everything was speaking to me. I am sensitive to all things, from a least blade of grass to the largest oak. The lark's song is like a waterfall in the sky. All of nature is my body. Everything feels like an exterior vein for the conveyance of feeling to me. Time does not exist. I live in eternity. The ever-present now is continuous. I speak to the sea and desire its strength. I address the sun and consciously draw from it the sole equivalent of its light. I gaze at the sky, I look at the sky and gaze into its depths. The blue sky draws my soul toward it, and there it rests. The pure wandering air and blue sky touch me and give me part of themselves. And so it was an internalized experience that he had, and that's the only way that we can really commune with something, is when we can feel it deeply within ourselves. And that's done through silence and through profound receptivity. And that's what's so beautiful about the deep nature play, is that you're so absorbed in the experience, that's all you have that's going on, and you are in the present moment. And then that's when you can have that communion with something else, whether it's the activity you're doing, but if it's play in nature, that aspect of nature. And so how this game is played, see if Greg, could you come up? In this activity, you have the responder, that'll be Greg, and then you have the prompter, and that'll be me, the person standing behind. And you look out at a view that is captivating, and then the person behind says the word, I am. And then the person in front, they look out, and they will notice something. Instead of saying what it is, they try to feel its living reality for a few seconds just inside themselves. Like maybe it's a sailing cloud or just the waving branch. They just try to feel that inside their bodies, and then they let their words come from that experience. And then you would change the word. You might say, instead of I am, you might say that a couple times, the idea that we are everything, to then I love, or I sense all around me, or I'm grateful for. And it's just a way of people, a chance for people to just take it inside and to feel it deeply, and let their simple words to capture it to some extent. Okay? So I'm going to have you close your eyes and imagine yourself in a favorite place in nature. Okay, and then when you, and why don't you stay there and keep your eyes closed. Okay, we have a lot of wonderful people here today, but you might want to be in the forest. That's just a nature activity. Okay. Are you in your place?
Yes.
Okay. I am.
The ripples on the lake.
I am.
The raven winging through the sky.
I love.
The gentle wind blowing through the trees.
I sense all around me.
The all-pervading peace of the forest.
I am grateful for.
The web of life.
Okay, thank you very much. I was in Taiwan a couple of years ago, and there was a woman, after playing this activity, she just fell to the ground on her knees like this and just started sobbing. And she said, for the last 30 years I wanted to have experience of oneness with nature, and I felt that just through this activity. And you know, everything is sort of advertised in big ways, but you know, when you internalize your experience, that's when things become profound, because you take it all in. And that's what happened. There was a man a school teacher who walks the Appalachian Trail every year, or maybe the Pacific Crest Trail, and he said that internalizing his energy through this activity, he got to a place in 4 minutes that would take him a month in the wilderness to get to in that same way. That's a big statement to make, but again, it's because he was internalizing his awareness, where, you know, what does the Bible say? Be still and know. Well, when you are receptive to other things and draw it in, we understand on a universal level our sense of oneness with it. Storytelling is a very big part of sharing nature and the share inspiration stage. You know, they found with storytelling that if a teller is telling the story, their brain becomes stimulated, and through MRIs they found that the audience, their brain is stimulated in the same way, and so it's actually a shared brain experience. And the listener doesn't have to have the experience, they just have to hear about the experience through the storyteller. John Muir was once telling a story, and somebody said, I could feel the rain and the wind on my forehead, and that's because they were really there in their brain. Well, I'd like to tell a story about John Muir, and he, let's see, where, lost my hat, oh, okay. Oh, is it over here? Excuse me. Oops. There we go. John Muir, he talked about, he was a guide in Yosemite Valley in his younger days, and people would always go on the tour to Yosemite, and sometimes he had to escort young ladies on the tour. It was something that he really hated because they would see a frog and they'd make a big like this, and all their big dresses, and he was pretty much a man of the wilderness at that time, and he didn't have a lot of patience for that. And he said that people that would visit the Sierras, they would complain that they didn't see any animals or birds. We haven't heard a bird song all day. And he said, well, no wonder people go in large groups and they wear outlandish clothing, and even the pines would run away if they could. But one day, Muir was out sketching, and he heard a flock up the valley of mountain quail coming his way. And mountain quail are the largest, most secretive of all the quail, and they're stocky birds that run on the ground, and every once in a while they'll fly. Well, he was sitting there sketching, And he could hear the birds coming closer. So he stayed very still. And the birds started walking. And one came within 3 or 4 feet of him. And Muir stayed very still, and he thought he was a stump or a tree, and he just kept walking. And the others kept walking really close, and Muir was just really excited because he could just watch them just feet away from him and hear their low muttering and just perfectly calm. And then one of the quail was walking by, and he stopped and looked at Muir, and he started like this, just, and looked in gaze and wonder at Muir. And then the others, when the alarm was sounded, they came and they all were looking at Muir like this. And then they all ran to the rest of the flock. And the rest of the birds, they go, "What is it? What is it? Oh, you never saw the like. Where? Down there by that tree. Down there by that tree." So all the quail started walking very cautiously. And then they turned around the tree, looked up, stretched their necks, as if knowing by the story told them just where Muir was. And they looked at him, and they all came up in silent wonder like this. And for the next 15 minutes, they would come forward, and then get a little frightened, go back, come forward. And then finally, they satisfied their curiosity and wandered off through the forest. And Muir was very sad to see them go. So he followed them for the next hour or two, crawling through the bush, seeing what berries they liked best. So, with nature experiences, it's not the information, is it, that's important. It's how our hearts are touched and how we feel that sense of resonance with other expressions of life. And it just expands our life. And we want to treat life with the respect that it's due. And this is the most valuable lesson in the way of teaching that really touches people and has the biggest impact in people's lives, is when we can touch on that level. Because then, when the heart's right, the heart is interested. And it's a lifelong journey of learning and developing greater empathy and appreciation. John Burroughs, the early nature educator, said that knowledge without love doesn't stick. But when love comes first, knowledge is pretty sure to follow. Because when we love something, we're very interested in it. And we really want to know it. But if we just learn outwardly about something in an abstract way, it just never touches us. There's an activity that we've created as a way to help really celebrate our sense of closeness with nature, and a way to send out your thoughts of goodwill to nature. And it's called the Birds of the Air. And I'd like to teach you the motions, and then we'll do it with music. And it goes like this. First, it's the birds of the air are my brothers. All flowers, my sisters. The trees are my friends. All living creatures, mountains and streams, I take under my care. For this green earth is our mother. Hidden in the sky is the spirit above. I share one life with all who are here. To everyone I give my love. To everyone I give my love. So why don't you stand, and I'll take you through the motions, and then we'll play the song. And I want you to think of one of your favorite places in nature, and you've received so much from being there. You've been recharged, enlivened, And this is a way to give back your sense of goodwill. You know, traditional societies, indigenous people talk about the importance of giving back to help keep the sense of balance, the sense of giving. And many times we've done this exercise and birds have come landing on the trees and just singing all around us. And I think it's because nature is just appreciated. And nature's no different than us. When we're appreciated, we like to give more, and we can give more because there's an openness and receptivity. Well, it's the same way. So, can everybody see? Oh, we have live musicians. Okay, ready? Okay.
Of the air are my brothers, all flowers my sisters, and trees are my friends, all living creatures, mountains and streams, I take unto my care. For this green earth is our mother, hidden in the sky is the spirit above. I share one life with all who are here. To everyone I give my love. To everyone I give my love. Birds of the air are my brothers, all flowers my sisters, the trees are my friends, all living creatures, mountains and streams, I take unto my care. For this green earth is our mother, hidden in the sky is the spirit above. I share one life with all who are here. To everyone I give my love. To everyone I give my love.
There are many different, oh, you can sit down. Thank you. Thanks. I wanted to share a variety of the sharing nature activities. There's some for children, for adults, and more inward reflective ones, as well as very active ones. The activities, they work. Sometimes you would choose some activities to warm up a group and use the flow learning method, which creates that enthusiasm, and people become more calm and receptive, and then you can try out more sensitive activities. But it's just a way of working with people to help them to be able to be at their best and be able to embrace a higher aspect of themselves. And so the activities just work, so I encourage you to try them. You don't have to be a natural history expert to do it, because it's all about what's happening within ourselves, like creating a sense of wholeness, a sense of wonder, and people learn along the way other things about nature as well. Well, I want to thank you for coming and being such a great audience, and I've enjoyed sharing with you this evening. Okay, thank you.